Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Charlene Aaron.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. President Obama is ordering his administration to get more aggressive in its response to Ebola in the United States. This comes after revelations the Centers for Disease Control may have been too lax in its procedures, allowing a nurse who treated a Dallas Ebola patient to travel on an airplane. Now she's being diagnosed with the deadly disease.
We are monitoring, supervising, overseeing in a much more aggressive way exactly what's taking place in Dallas initially, and making sure that the lessons learned are then transmitted to hospitals and clinics all across the country.
The president is now ordering the Centers for Disease Control to deploy medical SWAT teams within 24 hours to any hospital reporting a new case of Ebola. His orders come as Amber Joy Vincent, the second Dallas nurse to catch Ebola, is now in isolation at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. Amber treated the Liberian man who died at a Dallas hospital last week. She then flew to Cleveland to visit family and back to Dallas before she knew she had the disease. Vincent contacted the CDC about her travel plans, and it now admits it was a mistake to give her permission to fly with a heightened temperature of more than 99 degrees.
And this is making you wonder, is it safe to even, get on any of these planes going, anywhere?
The CDC says the risk to the 132 passengers is extremely low, but air travelers are still uneasy and the country is nervous. An ABC News Washington Post poll showed 65% of Americans are concerned about an epidemic, and a growing number of lawmakers are calling for the president to institute a travel ban to and from West Africa. House Speaker John Boehner said a temporary ban on travel to the United States from countries afflicted with the virus is something the president should consider. Today on Capitol Hill, a senior executive from the Dallas hospital where the Ebola patient Eric Thomas Duncan died is apologizing for mistakes. Now, people are also asking questions about this. The man directing the air transfer of the second Dallas nurse is standing on the tarmac without protective clothing. Meanwhile, the UN warns the world has 60 days to stop Ebola, or it will face an unprecedented situation, with the number of cases climbing as high as 10,000 per week, and the death rate now stands at 70%. The United Nations World Food Program now says if the Ebola outbreak continues to grow in the coming months, it could cause a major food crisis.
Anxiety about the spread of Ebola combined with concerns of a global economic slowdown is affecting the stock market. Wall Street endured a dramatic day on Wednesday. The Dow Jones Industrial plunged as much as 460 points following steep declines in Europe. That drove shares around the world sharply down and pushed the price of oil to a 4-year low. A late afternoon recovery erased much of the losses. And for the latest updates on the stock market throughout the day, log on to cbnnews.com.
With midterm elections roughly 2 weeks away, Democrats are choosing not to have President Obama campaign for them. The president's job approval ratings are hitting a record low. The Ebola crisis and other domestic and international issues are taking a toll on the president and his party. Americans believe President Obama is leading the country in the wrong direction. A new ABC News Washington Post poll finds his job approval rating at just 40%, the lowest of his presidency. 77% of Americans say they are worried about the economy, and the president's ratings are at a career low in his handling of the immigration, international affairs, and terrorism.
The lesbian mayor of Houston is backing down a little after targeting pastors there. Mayor Annise Parker's administration had subpoenaed the sermons of 5 Houston pastors who oppose the city's equal rights ordinance. That law creates special protections for homosexuals and transgenders. The pastors argued that Parker's legal action against them violates their religious liberty and free speech rights. Now, KTRH Radio reports Parker says she didn't mean to ask for their sermons.
People are rightly concerned if a government entity tries to in any way inhibit religious speech. That is not the intent.
But this battle is far from over. It centers on a petition to let citizens vote on the Equal Rights Ordinance. Opponents are suing because Houston rejected their petition. The case is going forward, and Houston officials have demanded the pastors turn over their emails, diaries, checkbooks, tape recordings, text messages, and much more. The Parker administration's revised demands will be clarified in upcoming hearings. CBN's Mark Martin spoke with David Welch of the U.S. Pastor Council, who helped to lead the fight against the ordinance.
Why would they want their sermons, and what are the pastors doing?
Well, it's really just a fishing expedition by the city in hope that they can delay the outcome of this lawsuit and avoid the basic facts of the matter. These sermons have nothing to do with whether or not the signatures we turned in were valid. In fact, the city secretary has confirmed on record multiple times now that we more than met the minimum. The city attorney then engaged in an act which we believe was premeditated to intentionally invalidate hundreds of petition sheets based on a bad use of interpretation of the affidavit part of it. In other words, a circulator who gathered the signatures then signed the sheet and had it notarized, and the city attorney simply eliminated over half of the petitions on that basis. That's what they're trying to avoid here, and just simply hope that they can intimidate the pastors and we'll walk away from it.
What's at stake here? Why are churches so concerned about this non-discrimination ordinance?
Well, the underlying purpose of this, which we exposed along the way in spite of the mayor's claims to the contrary, were to satisfy her LGBT, lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender agenda on the national level. There was no discrimination here in the city, and what we exposed through the process was that this was an effort to add sexual orientation and gender identity to discrimination protections and then punish businesses and citizens who did not feel that the allowed them to provide, for example, things like photography to weddings and the same kind of thing we happen all over the country. In addition, it opened up showers, locker rooms, restrooms to opposite genders. So a man who simply declared himself a woman could walk into a woman's restroom.
Wow. What are you hoping for in all of this?
Well, we really do believe we're going to win this in the courts. The facts and the law are on our side very clearly, and we're in this all the way through. And prayerfully, when that occurs, then it'll go to a vote of the people. And at that point in time, we're confident at this point that based on our polling and all the results that we'll be able to repeal this ordinance. And of course, the end game is to challenge the whole premise that the sexual orientation, gender identity are legitimate classes to be protected anyway compared to race, for example. This is what they've used to undermine marriage and family all across the country. And we've challenged that on here in Houston on that.
Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. God bless.
You too.
A magistrate in North Carolina could lose his job after he refused to marry a gay couple in Elizabeth City earlier this week. The Christian Science Monitor reports that Gary Littleton told the couple he wouldn't perform the marriage because of his religious beliefs. The area's chief district court judge says, quote, it could be construed that he had broken the law because that is a duty that a magistrate has, is to perform marriages. Judge Bean says if Littleton keeps refusing to issue same-sex marriages, he must resign or face removal.
A Northwest Ohio woman's creative idea to fight human trafficking is catching on. In 2010, Amy Seifert wore the same dress for 6 months. Her goal was to raise awareness about the problem. Now, 4 years later, her decision is still making an impact. CBN News spoke with Seifert about how her time in the dress is inspiring others.
I had an opportunity to speak at a regional conference in front of about 1,000 women, and I shared what I was doing. I was a couple months in, and from that conference, many girls in several states across the country decided to join me for a month at a time in my 6-month journey. So they were doing 1 month, one dress with my One Gray Dress project. So they were bringing it to their campuses, which was really fun. And it just kind of caught fire in that way.
The U.S. State Department estimates 20 to 30 million people are trafficked worldwide each year. Amy says everyone can help fight trafficking. The easiest way is to get creative.
Well, it's been 6 months since more than 200 Nigerian schoolgirls were kidnapped by Muslim extremists in eastern Nigeria. While many may have moved on from that story of the girls' plight, some are actually making sure the girls are not forgotten. In April, armed members of the terrorist group Boko Haram kidnapped 276 girls from their school in Abuja, Nigeria. Since then, 57 of the girls have managed to escape. But despite an international social media campaign, 219 are still missing. Some families are losing hope and say the government is not doing enough to help.
The hope of finding my daughter or our daughters lies in the hands of the government and the security men, because on our own, we cannot do anything.
Tuesday, protesters marched outside the residence of Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, urging the government to take fast action and free the girls. The government is pleading with residents for trust as it unveils a new plan of action. Bring back all girls! Here at home, singer Alicia Keys is lending her star power to the cause. She joined demonstrators at the Nigerian consulate in New York to raise awareness about the missing girls.
Well, today is my son's birthday, and it is also making me stand in solidarity with all the mothers of the Chibok girls who have been abducted for 6 months and are still missing. And it is just outrageous that that's going on.
The group chanted, "Bring back our girls," with the hope that the world won't abandon them.
I don't know if people have forgotten. I think they just have to be reminded. You know what I mean? Naturally, it was in the news for a while when it first happened. It's been 6 months, fair enough. Some people have even told me they've heard, things about there's been progress, but there hasn't been progress because the girls aren't back.
And Boko Haram is fighting a war against Nigeria's government and seeks to establish an Islamic state in northern Nigeria.
A Category 4 hurricane is bearing down on Bermuda with winds nearing 140 miles per hour. Gonzalo is the strongest Atlantic hurricane in 3 years. It's 250 miles wide, and the current track has the most dangerous portion heading right for Bermuda. It is expected to hit on Friday.
Coming up, they say giving is good for the soul, but new research shows it's also good for the body. Sweden is on its way to becoming a cashless society. The Local reports that a new study says 4 of 5 purchases in Sweden are paid for electronically with a debit card or a credit card. And the report says that as technology gets cheaper, the trend is toward a completely cash-free society.
Middle income and poor people give more of their income to charity, and states with a higher percentage of churchgoers top the rankings. Those are some of the findings from the latest report from the Chronicle of Philanthropy. The Chronicle analyzed IRS data and found poor and middle-income Americans have increased their charitable giving, while the wealthiest give a smaller share. The most generous states, as we mentioned earlier, included those with high church attendance, topped by Utah, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee.
Well, the Bible tells us to give, and believe it or not, doctors now agree.
Indeed, as Lori Johnson shows us, overwhelming evidence proves generosity is good for your health, from preventing cancer and heart disease to building self-esteem.
The facts are clear. Givers live longer, happier, healthier lives. Several recent studies show generosity triggers a number of significant changes, all good, both mentally and physically. Here at the world-renowned Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Michael McKee develops ways to enhance the inner healing response of patients.
There are tremendous health benefits to giving.
Stress leads to illness, and Dr. McKee says giving can reverse the deadly effects of stress. It doesn't matter whether you give time or money, or if it's to a loved one or complete stranger.
Well, we know that the giving tends to reduce blood pressure, slow heart rate. Again, giving reduces stress. It reduces depression.
Researchers from the National Institutes of Health studied MRIs of people who gave to various charities. They found generosity stimulates the reward center in the brain, releasing chemicals that strengthen our immune system.
And we know again that there's a release of endorphins. These are the kind of magical chemicals that come from various areas in the brain, and they flood throughout the system. They're cousins, basically, but some reduce pain, some kind of seek out sick-looking cells and exert a healing effect on them. They have many different positive effects.
Dr. Stephen Deutsch is the chairman of psychiatry at the Eastern Virginia Medical School. He says doctors commonly use giving in treating depression.
We encourage people to not be so self-absorbed and to think about others. We even tell people to practice being concerned and invested in other people.
He says the more people give, the easier it gets.
Sometimes they may feel initially that it's fraudulent, that's not really who they are, but over time it becomes more and more comfortable for them, and it does have a powerful therapeutic effect.
So people who feel powerless or worthless find a new purpose and value by seeing their actions help others. And they tend to live longer and healthier lives. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Up next, it's a tiny Muslim nation that's been called the world's largest funder of terror. So why do they also claim to be an ally of the Obama administration?
And welcome back. The tiny, oil-rich nation of Qatar is supposed to be one of our allies in the battle against the ISIS army.
But it's actually supporting radical Islamists, including some of the same savage groups that were fighting in Syria. Eric Stakelbeck brings us this shocking story.
$11 billion in advanced American weaponry, Apache helicopters, Patriot missile batteries, anti-tank missiles, all for a tiny Muslim nation in the Persian Gulf that you can barely find on a map. Qatar may not be a household name for most Americans, but as this summer's huge arms deal shows, the Qataris are among the Obama administration's closest allies in the Middle East. Yet Qatar has come under heavy criticism from neighboring countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. They and Egypt have cut relations with the tiny kingdom because it supports the Muslim Brotherhood. One Israeli official even called Qatar the world's largest funder of terror, thanks to its close alliance with Hamas.
Qatar supports Hamas in three ways. One is financially. It's given Hamas hundreds of millions of dollars. Two is politically. The ruler of Qatar was the first Arab state to visit Hamas-ruled Gaza in 2012. And the third way it supports Hamas, we can say physically. Qatar is host and home to Hamas's political leadership.
Speaking to the UN General Assembly, Qatar's emir urged world governments to shun Israeli officials, accusing Israel of war crimes during its recent operation against Hamas in Gaza.
Qatar has pledged over the last decade or so over $500 million to Hamas governments, Hamas infrastructure projects, and Hamas loyalists in the Gaza Strip.
David Weinberg is a Mideast analyst for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He told CBN News that Qatar's cozy relationship with Hamas is starting to get attention.
We've seen some public statements recently from Mike Rogers, the Intel Committee chairman in the House, as well as from the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, Ed Royce, both raising concerns about Qatar's record in this regard.
In July, Illinois Congressman Peter Roskam sent a letter to the Obama administration demanding an end to the close alliance with Qatar. Roskam wrote, "It's an indisputable fact that Qatar has become the chief sponsor of Hamas, an internationally recognized terrorist organization committed to the destruction of Israel. The Obama administration must explain its working partnership with a country that so brazenly funds terrorism right before our eyes." During Israel's recent war with Hamas, Secretary of State John Kerry drew heavy criticism for promoting Qatar as an honest broker that could help negotiate a ceasefire, despite its open support for Hamas.
Here was Qatar's chance to shine on the international stage. while the world was watching these negotiations. And Qatar showed itself as Hamas's supporter rather than an effective mediator.
It's not the first time Qatar served as mediator for the administration. Most recently, it secured the controversial release of U.S. soldier Bo Bergdahl from the Taliban. The Taliban even has an office in the Qatari capital of Doha. So does Al Jazeera, the network which has been accused of being anti-American and a mouthpiece for radical Islamists is based in Qatar.
The relationship is extraordinarily close. For many years, the Qatari government was subsidizing Al Jazeera.
The most explosive charge is that Qatar helped fund jihadists in Syria, including ISIS and the al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra Front, two groups targeted by U.S. airstrikes. The Qatari government strongly denies it, but a top Treasury Department official said last March that wealthy private donors who live in Qatar have backed the jihadists. The official described Qatar as a permissive environment for terrorist fundraising. But with the Qataris apparently on board in the fight against ISIS and Qatar hosting a major U.S. airbase, don't expect a change in relations anytime soon. Eric Stakelbeck, CBN News, Washington.
And stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Finally today, after more than 18 years of hard work, Bible translators have launched a new Farsi language Bible for people in Iran.
Elam Ministry says it expects to print and distribute more than 300,000 copies within the next 3 years, most of them for use inside Iran. Though it's a closed Muslim country, Iran is home to one of the fastest growing churches in the world today. The Islamic Republic had only 500 Christians in 1979. Today, because of expanded satellite television and internet use, some estimate the number could be as high as 750,000.
It's amazing that we have so many brothers and sisters in Christ in Iran. Praise God. Well, that's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
It is Thursday, everybody. Make it a thankful one.